Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 16, and we're going to be talking about a number of current events. I haven't done a video in about 9 or 10 days, so we're getting back into posting videos. Some of it is just spring is here, it's warm, and I'm wanting to do things other than sit inside and make videos. So that's part of it. Also, some bad news. Recently, Roe v. Wade on its way to being overturned in the United States. This possibly is paving the way for a nationwide abortion ban. It's definitely going to make the situation a lot harder for people who need abortions in the states where there have already been statewide restrictions, like Texas's 6-week ban. Another state just passed a 6-week ban on abortions. And anyway, horrendous stuff that kind of set me back a little bit. But we're getting back into it now. Also, I worked my ass off in April. We got like over 24 videos up on the channel, so took a little bit of a break, but we are back now. Anyway, I've been streaming for about 15 minutes, and there's some people in the chat. We've been having a discussion about organizing, and we're going to get back to that right now that we're recording. But basically, there was a post that I put up a few days ago. And I must say, if you're not on Twitter, probably this doesn't apply so much to you, because it really is, I resisted setting up an S4A Twitter for about a year and a half. And then after Facebook was completely done, S4A got kicked off of Facebook like 3 times just for existing. I didn't do any social media for a while, and then I was like, all right, I'll set up a Twitter just to kind of plug the videos and whatever. And it's a decent way to get some current event stuff, although the rapid fire information overload set up on Twitter is, I think, it's like crack. I mean, it just hits you too much too fast, and not a good situation. I think that people who use Twitter really regularly wind up in sort of just an altered state of consciousness that is not really conducive to anything, and people get really addicted to it. But anyway, so this is a lot of where that's coming from. I get this less from the YouTube audience, but I think that it roughly applies to a lot of people who are consuming a lot of social media, etc. There is also this general question of the U.S. left. What is the potential of the U.S. left? I'm putting resources out there in English, and obviously I'm in the U.S. They're, of course, not off limits to people outside the U.S., although that is where the majority of the audience is located of this channel. But, I'm talking to a lot of people in the U.S. left, and we hear a lot of the same questions and issues come up over and over again. One of them is about joining an organization versus just being addicted to your phone. My background is not that. My background is from real-world action, and I don't really understand what is going on now with people like, is it important to join an organization? Like, how do you think any change happens? So we're going to come back to a couple of comments that were posted in the chat and discuss that. But I want to read out the statement first that I posted a couple of days ago. And this was kind of building up after me watching the Roe v. Wade thing. And I was trying to say to people there, I'm like, okay, so the Democratic Party is primarily responsible for where we're at with the Roe v. Wade situation because, and not just the Roe v. Wade situation, everything, climate change, you name it. Any of the things that there's been popular outcry to address, they've been standing in the way of people actually trying to make any change. They're saying, oh, we'll do it, vote for us, make the change. Then they get in and they never fucking do it. Never. So I was saying the Democratic Party is primarily responsible for why we're in the situation because they are basically running cover for the more overtly reactionary elements in the Republican Party. Obviously, both parties are owned and controlled by the 1%. We need a workers' party free of that control. And I was saying that the bare minimum people can do is build up the fucking Green Party because they do not take the corporate money. They're not owned by the 1% in that way. They follow the Bernie rules of fundraising, basically. And I think that their initial demands reform platform is comparable to any other more, quote, more socialist party or more Marxist party. Um, the idea is that under capitalism, we push for every reform we can get. And when the system can no longer produce reforms, then we use that fact to say to the masses, like, look, we need to end capitalism. We've taken capitalism as far as it can possibly go. We're not at that point yet, so we can't make that, we can't demonstrate that as clearly. You still have people saying, oh, they could give us more. And they could. But, there's just a lot of lower level and intermediate struggle. People want to jump straight to revolution. That's really not how it works at all. You have to actually build up a movement for reform, get as much as you can, but realizing that if you actually want to make all these reforms permanent, revolution is the way to actually do that. But there's a lot of steps leading up to that. And again, you get people just, Twitter blasting, thinking that somehow this is like a step of struggle, and it's really media activity in the periphery. It's not actually the struggle in and of itself. I know people will make a lot of excuses for, oh, but it has value, whatever. It's just not struggle. It's media activity in the periphery. That's what it is. So, and then people are like, Green Party, what are you talking about? Well, the situation right now is that people, if they're politically minded at all, they try for a while to be active in the Democratic Party, elect better Democrats, elect more Democrats, whatever it is. That doesn't work, which we know. And then people just drop out entirely and they don't do anything else. What I was trying to get at is there are middle steps people are not doing. They're like, they either do the Democrats or they do nothing at all. And no, actually, there's a lot of lower level and intermediate stages that we need to build up. And also, if we did that, people wouldn't be as confused about what are the next steps. People are looking for some big fireworks show as the next step. It doesn't work like that. It's actually grunt work, building up the left resources that exist in the first place. And, think what you want about them. The Green Party, which has a lot of problems, definitely is the largest sort of mass left party in the United States. So what I'm saying is if people won't even do the bare minimum of building that up and seeing how far can you take that, they say, oh, it won't go anywhere. Well, you know what else won't go anywhere? Doing absolutely nothing, which is what most people are doing. So anyway, it's enormously frustrating to me. Most people just give up and then they complain. And I don't know, pitying yourself just isn't really a solution. So that's why I'm calling for people, get back out there, fill in all the cracks and, rebuild the broken down mass institutions that have been broken down over the last 50 or 60 years. And that kind of gets back into the comment that started this off. But let me read the statement and then we'll pick it up with the questions. So, for an intensification of class struggle in the USA, or why I haven't posted this week, originally posted on Twitter and there's a link. It's true that a lot of you, more on Twitter than on YouTube, never log off the internet, haven't breathed fresh air in several years. But if you think it's possible to do a revolution without mass organizations, you really need to sign out, put down the device, open some windows, and get some oxygen back into your brains. I started this S4A project literally just to read more Marx, Engels, Lenin, etc., to better inform my own politics and political actions. The channel became popular and people even started donating money for me to spend more time on it, which I appreciate. And by the way, I will put up the patron screen before the end. I've since realized, however, that many people aren't interested in action. They just like to be read certain bedtime stories, about revolution and change, but they're not necessarily involved in it themselves. It's a fandom for many, little more, and me, the person who is actually putting in the effort to do this channel, I have nothing but contempt for that sort of it's a fandom attitude. I look at around like, let me just back that up. I want to really emphasize that. I look at the people who aren't in an organization, aren't really serious about anything but social media activity. I don't want you listening to this channel. I mean, seriously. If that's your sort of attitude, please just don't associate yourself with this. I guess you can consider it the price of using the resources. You have to. Anyway, I want to just start screaming, honestly. It's the most frustrating thing in the world. I did not think, starting this channel, that 2 years later, I would be in a situation where it's just repeatedly fighting off these hordes of people, making any excuse to not actually get out there and do something with it. Seriously, it's part of the reason I didn't post anything this week, as the title of this implies. So anyway, continuing. I look around at a country like the USA, where mass organizations of all kinds have been gutted over the last 50 or so years, and I think if any of this is going to change, we need mass orgs again. A vanguard without mass orgs is like a brain without a body. People will log onto Twitter every day and say we need a general strike or we need a revolution. Great. Nice hashtags. But how will you get it? Do you even know? There are things that advance the struggle by pulling the masses into conscious action by the millions. Tweets are not one of them. Look at the US left and what most average households in the country know of it. They know things like the mass uprisings in 2020, and they know the political campaigns of Bernie in 2015-16, 2019-20. And you could throw in Occupy as well, because that became like a household term. That's what large numbers of people got involved in, and so it's what made the news for other people to hear about. So to take Bernie, for example, which was sort of there was the 2020 uprisings. That was remarkably short-lived, I thought. But Bernie was sort of the last sort of long-term thing that a lot of discussion happened around. My opinion of him is the problem is not so much that he tried to gatecrash the Democratic Party. I think that this was a fine strategy for gathering up the left wing of the Democratic Party, such as it is, and using its promotional infrastructure to do propaganda. The problem is that when it failed to take power in 2016, he stayed with the party. This is an unreformable party. So Bernie not only gathered up the disaffected Democratic left, but also pulled many even more disaffected people out of the woodwork. I know because I heard interviews with them, and I talked to some myself in real life. People who are like, I gave up hope on anything political in the United States, that anything was ever going to change 30 years ago. But I came back out for Bernie. I heard that multiple times. Okay, great. But then what did Bernie do with these people who were ready? They came back out. Like, people, it's not like just apathy or whatever. It's people don't feel like anything's working, so they give up. They're not happy about giving up, but they give up. But then what did Bernie do with them? He fed them into an unreformable party and told them it could be reformed. We're going to stay and fix the Democratic Party. No. And Bernie knew better. He absolutely knew better. But for those of us who stand outside of and to the left of the Democratic Party, it isn't about Bernie anymore. Bernie has disgraced himself. But it is about the people that Bernie rallied, the people who showed with their commitments of time and resources that they do want change. And people did commit a lot of time and a lot of resources to that. People going, yes, I want all of these things and then some. You know, like anything else, the Bernie movement had a left wing. I was in the left wing, and the right wing. And, you know, whoever fucking Cenk Uygur was in the right wing. But that's how things are. They have, you know, things are relative. There's relatively a left wing and relatively a right wing. You do what you can, and you push the struggle as far as you can during any one stage of it. That's how things work. So that's just the Bernie people. Even more people then turned out in the streets during the 2020 uprisings that were sparked by the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. That's a Democratic Party-led city where not enough has changed, considering that 2 years later there was the 2022 police murder of Amir Locke in the middle of the night during a no-knock warrant raid. He was sleeping on somebody's couch and cops shot him. There's a video about that in the subsequent protests of that. That was, I think, back in February, 3 months ago. So all these people continue to want change that the system, including the Democratic Party, definitely part of the system, is never going to deliver. So we know that that system needs to be confronted and broken down. We're talking about capitalism. So pulling those people back into sustained organized struggle to actually do that work of confronting and breaking down capitalism is what's not happening nearly enough. So here's the big question. And, people who consider themselves Marxists or Marxist-Leninist, whatever, even Trotskyists, etc., you need to hear this part. Is every one of these people that we're talking about, these millions, tens of millions of people, going to apply for membership in and be accepted into a vanguard party? No, they're definitely not, nor do they need to. But on the flip side, without any organization at all, they're useless to themselves and to the working class more generally. And that's how capitalists want it. Unorganized and unable to really effectively participate in organized class action. So what's the solution? Solution is what I'm calling here mass organizations. Mass organizations need as many communists at every level of their membership as we can fill them with. So this whole, thinking of like, oh, that organization isn't explicitly communist, I can't touch them. Your radical ancestors would slap you in the face for saying that. Where the working people are, we need to be. That's the point. And that used to be the state of things in the U.S. before McCarthyism in the 1940s and 50s. That was a time when radicals were driven out of community organizations. What are we talking about? We're talking about things like labor unions, tenant unions, other community unions like bus riders unions, public transit riders unions, all of the other local organizations that exist as the glue of working people's social and economic lives at and below the statewide level. So, state, county, local organizations. This can also include things like women's organizations, immigrants' organizations, student organizations, etc. Anywhere that we socialists can be in these spaces, pushing Democrats out of these spaces to make room for conversations about class consciousness. And by the way, yes, I'm talking about all Democrats, especially whatever dumbass progressive Democrat you're supporting, because it's an issue of the party, not an issue of the individual. The party allows no change, and they just drag people down to their level. They're owned by the 1%. We need to push Democrats out of every space that we can get a foothold in to make room for conversations about class consciousness. We need to be there. Also, where local government seats are gettable. Now, the U.S. election system is a joke. It's ridiculous. Money basically buys most elections with a startling degree of effectiveness. I think the average is like 95% at the federal level. It's a little lower for the Senate. It's like 82%. Who spends the most money gets the seat. For Congress, it's much higher. It's like 97%. If you spend more money, you're likely to win 97% of the time. But at some local levels, and even at some of the local levels in some places, even that is sewn up. Like it's even not penetrable, even at a local level. But we know that sometimes local or state government seats are gettable. Then we need to get them, but also without illusions as to how far this will take us in and of itself, right? So having the person in there, use it for what you can use it for, but that is not the goal, like the end-all, be-all in and of itself. And we obviously need to do that not as Democrats, which is where political parties and hubs like the Green Party or DSA, where DSA doesn't endorse Dems and where they do, make them stop, come in. That's how you can actually get some people who are against both parties in and who aren't libertarians, who sadly libertarians are the third largest party in the United States. So that's disgusting because they're basically even worse, arguably, than the Democrats and Republicans. But some people fall for that, tempting libertarian grift thing. As socialists, we really need to reject that because they want nothing but unrestrained capitalism, basically. It could not be further from what we're looking for. It literally is just in the opposite direction. So the overall point of all of this activity is to advance the struggle. Which struggle? The class struggle. The working class against the owning class. on as many fronts as possible until we force a break, a crisis of demands which are only possible under a reorganization of the economy away from capitalism into socialism. Now, you get some of those reforms on the capitalism side of the struggle. You try to milk capitalism for as many reforms as you can possibly get out of it. And you use those reforms as propaganda. Say, this is what we've gotten so far. With more struggle, we can get more, and we'll be able to get even more than that after capitalism. But you don't just say this as words on paper. It has to be part of a process that people are involved in, and it's actually demonstrating some change in their lives. It's not just some abstract, algebra problem that you're doing on the blackboard in front of them. This has to be a real life thing, not just a discussion. So getting into these organizations everywhere we possibly can is how in 2022 to get going with this. If we do not get into these mass organizations and do the patient work of building relationships with the people in and around them, then we never gain influence and our ideas remain unheard and untested. If you want a revolution someday, a future without capitalism, you can't avoid this point. Why do you think the capitalists drove us out of the mass orgs in the first place, under McCarthyism, back in the late 40s and 50s? They had to cut us off from the masses so that we couldn't be there as their partners, encouraging them to engage in greater and greater forms of class struggle. And it worked. They pushed us out, and the labor movement collapsed from the late 50s into the 60s and on, and everything else fell apart. I mean, public institutions have been under attack, really successful attack. The whole thing of neoliberalism, defund, deregulate, privatize. That's been the thing. And it's because we are not there, partly. They had a purge of socialists from every facet of civil society, and then they started having their way. And it's been very effective. So the result is that whether your vanguard clique has 10 members or 10,000, you're mostly playing to an echo chamber that may not be directly involved in solving the day-to-day problems of the masses' economic lives. So having other socialists to talk to and to study with is important, but socialists have to break this overall pattern and get back into our communities and their organizations en masse. Especially watching the first sparks of the fire that may send Roe v. Wade up in smoke this week, further ruining the lives of many working U.S. people. I am literally begging U.S. socialists to log off and get involved where you live. For me, somebody who is trying to make a contribution by doing human-read audiobooks and discussions of historical materials, as well as some current events media commentary, I feel like I'm in a tough spot because many people have told me that the material put up on the channel is useful, but there's another side, and it's this sort of bedtime story crowd. The cranks, just weirdos who want another reading to boost their fandom, but they aren't involved in the real world. I 100% do not want to contribute to the terminally online cocoon of any single person on this earth in any way. But no matter how much I challenge this and no matter how many times I speak out against it, it's never enough. So I need you all to join in that. This just cannot be a normal thing in any way. So, and it honestly takes up a lot of my time, but I'm telling you, this is a real thing. You're not quite in my vantage point. This channel is not the hugest one. There's about 7,500 subscribers right now. And then, maybe 10,000 with the people who are engaging without being subscribed. I see a lot from this position, and I'm seeing way too much of this shit. I'm telling you, this is a real problem. I get people like, oh, just ignore it. Ignoring problems really rarely ever solves them, and this is not a case where it's going to solve it. So I need you all to get involved in the pushback here. I cannot do it myself. It's really exhausting. So truly, I can't speak enough against it because the most online tend to be the most vocal about it. But make no mistake, we are not the same. I do not come from an exclusively online background, and I know that it's not a path to change. S4A is meant to reinforce real-life action, not to be a substitute for it, because, anyone? There is no substitute for it. So, while I'm writing this against the cranks who want to live in their fantasy bubbles, not learning from history but trying to hide in it, who is it for? It's for the many of you who I know aren't like this. Those of you who do get it and who can do the work of getting involved and rebuilding our real world presence. That presence truly needs to be everywhere that working people are coming together to try to meet their needs and solve their problems. Our job is to help them with those struggles and to push them further against the system that's holding them back in ways that are strategic and useful. Aside from the organizations that are owned by the 1% and that truly wage war on any kind of socialist, again, in the US, the main relevant culprit that poses any, sustained temptation to the left is the Democratic Party. We need to get out there and take up residence in every mass org available to us. Roe v. Wade being overturned and dying oceans, we're talking about microplastics, all this other stuff. This is just the beginning if we don't pull off much bigger moves eventually. I mean, and really, by eventually, I mean like today. So, let's get to it. Anyway, that was the statement. Really, it drives me nuts. And I think for me, it comes down to I am putting this stuff out there as resources to reinforce real world action. And there's too many people who think that this is the end in and of itself and aren't doing real world action. And really, I don't know, here's the smelling salts. I don't know how else to get through to people on this. And I think this just needs to become a community thing. Don't leave it up to me to keep pushing on these people. This needs to become a really sustained refrain from all quarters, Anyway, those are some of my thoughts on that. Let me check back in with the chat here and pick up the discussion we were having before I hit record. Actually, let me just take a quick break. I'll be right back in 1 minute. All right, there we go. Realized we'd been going for a while. So, all right. So where this kind of came from in the comments was somebody asked, do I think a new organization could emerge or will, do I think a new organization could emerge or will change come from within already big but liberal organizations? So, as I was saying, I don't exactly know what is meant by already big but liberal organizations. Virtually everything in the United States could be said to fit that definition. What I do think is needed is it needs to be outside the Democratic Party and it needs to be big. I don't really care, if it's a coalition, if it's a new organization, if it's whatever. But, people not building up what is already here. This is something I was talking about before I started recording. So there's a lot of people who are like, oh, hey, I read the manifesto like last month and I'm a communist now and like this and that. Where do I get started? And we're really skipping over a lot of the beginning and intermediate steps here. And I think that there would be a lot less confusion about this if people weren't skipping over those basic steps. There seem to be two modes for like the left is in the United States. It's one, trying to reform the Democratic Party, elect more progressives, whatever. And then when they realize that doesn't work, doing nothing. That is mode two. So I'm saying there's a lot of other stuff people can do that is just not being done. People are just dropping out completely. They at a minimum are things like the Green Party and DSA. Now, again, you want to do what you can with those, build them up, get what you can out of them. The potential of even those organizations are far from maxed out at this point. That's the issue I'm trying to get across. When you've built them as much as you can and you see that they still can't go the distance, that is the point when you say, okay, we've gotten this far, now it's time for the next step. But trying to prefigure it all on paper and then just jump to the ending, I don't know that it really works that way. So, and the other question was, does this issue of misunderstanding the revolutionary buildup of the workers stem from leftcom or anarchist influence? No, I don't think so. I mean, there's problems with both of those, but no, I don't think that that is the issue of understanding the sort of buildup of, like, you don't jump straight to the ending. Or is it ignorance and severe labor bashing over decades? So this is where we got into the sort of destruction and erosion of the mass organizations. For all of his deficits, I'm really not a big Chris Hedges fan. One of the things that he said that made some sense was he does catalog pretty well the breakdown of all of the working class institutions in the U.S. since World War II and into neoliberalism. And that's true. Like, you don't just jump from, like, anyway, you get the idea. People have to be organized, and then those organizations become radical. If they're being organized by people who are already radical, then great. Understand that the people in the communities, in the working masses, may not be there in their thinking. They may be, conditions may be such that they can become receptive to socialist working class ideology. But, we live in a society that's pervaded by bourgeois ideology, social conservatism, etc. And it does take a little bit for people to have their ideology match the conditions. For us, it mostly does. But yeah, I mean, I'd say it's more ignorance and severe labor bashing, the breakdown of mass organizations over decades. Because again, people want to talk about, labor unions aren't socialism. Okay, true in and of itself. The AFL is kind of reactionary in a lot of ways. The last video I put up on the channel was about the IWW, including its struggles against the AFL, now AFL-CIO, but back in those days, just the AFL. But to think that you're going to just start from scratch, from a state of total disorganization, and jump over the AFL somehow to just do revolution. Yeah, again, not so much. Oh, you know what? I was going to do some of this in a separate video. Let me just see if I have a graphic about the... there was a very useful graphic for visualizing the state of the U.S. labor movement. Let's see if I've got that on here. No, doesn't look like I do. I'll try searching on Union. This might be it, actually. Yeah. So there on the screen, program must have updated its controls. There we go. Union density. So what do we see here? The red line is the private sector, and the green line is the public sector, where there's still not great but decent unionization. About a third of the public sector is unionized. But private sector used to be about 35% unionized in late 1950s. In the late 50s, it starts to crash. Incidentally, what else happened? 1955, oh yeah, AFL and CIO merged. Why? What were we just talking about? McCarthyism? The Red Scare? The whole, you'd have to make a pledge like, I am not and have never been a member of the Communist Party. That's when all that stuff was happening. Well, within a decade, so many socialists were tossed out of the labor unions that the CIO collapsed and got eaten by the AFL. So it became AFL-CIO, or as some of us call it, the AFL-CIA. What happens after that point? That's where line go down. So that's not good. So what's been happening to the labor movement for the last 6 decades? Collapse. It's been dying. It's been dying, except for the public sector, which is, managed to stay fairly high, although it has been dipping somewhat in recent years. So I feel like this graph, this is truly a picture worth 1,000 words kind of situation. I'm just looking at it now, and it's like there's your answer. There's your answer. Now, again, unions are not socialism in and of themselves, but they are organizations of working people who are fighting at least for what Lenin called economism, better pay and conditions, although divorced from a struggle to end capitalism in and of itself. Which do you think is better? Having at least this there, and then having opportunities for radicals to push, for more militant action and more sharpened class consciousness within that, or not having it at all? Yeah. And, this is labor unions. The same is true in many other just sectors of society. The fact that it is so hard to live in 2022 is not a coincidence. It's because all of the infrastructure that supported working people's lives has been eroded immensely. So that's the situation that we're at. I don't know. So those are some thoughts on that. Let's continue with the comments. So somebody replied to the question of, does the issue of misunderstanding the revolutionary buildup of the workers stem from left comm anarchist influence? Somebody responded with, the anarchists are doing more in real life work than Marxists right now. I honestly would have to say that that's probably accurate, but it doesn't have to stay the case. You're listening to this now. We're talking about it. We're having a discussion about it. So we can definitely change that. It's a question of how much people want to do. Do you want to get out there and get involved in the struggle, or do you want to let other people take over the struggle for you, such as anarchists? Now, I'm not a big fan of anarchism. I think that there's a lot of well-meaning anarchists out there. I don't think that anarchism as an ideology is sound. I think that there's a lot of instances of, in a revolutionary situation, it really failing. But I think, there probably are more anarchist direct action, mutual aid things going on right now. Again, though, they tend to be insular. I don't know that there is this sort of rejection of the idea of working broadly with the masses in community organizations, etc. Again, you look at how much emphasis was put during McCarthyism on getting socialists and communists and anarchists out of any kind of position, whether it's being the local librarian or whatever it is, being on this committee or that committee. How much emphasis they put and how much effort they put into getting us out of those posts. I think we need to now get ourselves back in. And these kind of holier than thou, little collective this and that, that's not really connecting with the masses so much, and that's not really how you get a revolution going. Again, revolution being pretty far down the line, and that's just the way it is. So anyway, let's see. Let's see. Somebody said, I'm more glad every day that I've never joined Twitter. Again, you can hop on and get a pretty quick taste of what's going on in current events. As far as getting sucked into it, taking a sip there. Actually, I was just posting about that. Giving Twitter free content with my words. Let me pull it up because it was just 3 posts, and I feel like it pretty much summed up my thoughts on the whole thing. Now, that said, while this is loading, I follow about 5,000 people, and about 5,300 are following S4A, and that's that's some amount of connection there as far as just spreading some news. Is it struggle? No. But anyway, I was posting just last night. It really hit me today, and this was true, how utterly empty and unsatisfying being online daily is. I've spent more time online during the pandemic than ever before, and I completely hate it. That's 100% true, by the way. I resisted doing much social media until the last few years, and it's one of the worst ways to spend one's time. If I ever end up going offline again, it'll have nothing to do with my dedication to socialism, just the opposite. You can only do so much in an environment like this without getting consumed by it, and I feel like that's been happening. It really affects you the more you use it. I really feel like it's been affecting me, and it's actually getting to a point where I'm like writing these like screeds of like, what the fuck are people doing? So, you look at the kind of personalities that get created by and promoted by a site like this, and it's just the most obnoxious, toxic specimens of humanity who ever existed. That arguably is a kind of social engineering in and of itself, and it's impossible to avoid. Like, they're everywhere. Somebody replied to this with something I thought was, where was it? Well, anyway, somebody was just talking about like how trying to explain stuff that happens on social media, like say Twitter, to somebody who doesn't use it, it's like it's a good way to feel insane trying to like explain stuff explain all the weird inside jokes and just craziness that happens online to somebody who doesn't use it, because they'll be like, wait, what was that word you just used? And I'm like, oh yeah, well, that's an inside joke from 2 years ago, blah blah blah. And it's nuts. It becomes this sort of virtual reality cocoon. That's not the direction we need to be going in. So anyway, let's see. Agitation draws out specific complaints. We can't pay rent. Organization makes sure we can all pay rent. Yeah, absolutely. Agitate, educate, organize. Agitation is, people have complaints. You draw out specific complaints. Education is talking to people about what the sources of those are in terms of capitalism. And organization is getting people together for concerted, strategic mass action to actually do something about it. So, what else do we have? A couple of people saying hi. There was a senator that said something about banning birth control. Yeah, so the thing about that, if they go legally with conception is the start of life, then literally like a zygote is considered a person. And so there are certain kinds of birth control that are not abortifacients, but some insist that they are, like IUDs. That they may be coming for like IUDs and things like that. So yeah, this is the start of really bad things. I think not posting for 10 days was sort of, for me at least, the minimum response of like trying to come to terms with what was going on. And again, this is in the context of things I hear back from people both in the audience and sort of detractors, because, doing this, obviously, you get hate, too. And just looking at what, various, like, fascist channels, like Infracell or whatever, are doing, and what we're up against, in other words. It's sort of feedback, because what's going on in those fascist channels. It's a direct response to Marxist channels, actually good ones, getting more popular. That's why they're out there. They're trying to derail the conversation, and they're trying to organize people against us. And I don't just mean S4A. I mean, all of the various decent Marxist channels that are out there. That's why they're out there. It's, I don't know. I hear a lot of this feedback, and if I was hearing more like, we're ready to go, we're going to do this, we're going to push back on it in this way, I'd be like, awesome, things are in hand. I don't feel like that at all. I feel like things are out of hand. People are running around with their heads on fire. The right wing is in charge, and we are not even acting in a reactive capacity effectively. So it honestly really frightens me, just where we're at right now. So somebody says, the Democratic Party is the ratchet effect. They prevent any movement to the left while the Republicans push the political landscape further to the right. Yes, probably a lot of us have seen that meme. I do think it's accurate. So somebody says, I'm also not sure it's fair to call the Greens totally a middle ground. A lot of local chapters are straight up communist. Mine is at least. Yeah, but again, a lot of the people giving me shit about that have no idea what they're talking about. Actually, in an earlier post I made about that, somebody was like, "Oh yeah, too bad they're not in my state." And I was like, "What state are you in?" They were like, "Nevada." And I was like, click, click, click. Yeah, they are. And I gave them the link. And then they were looking at it, and somebody else weighed in, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I guess they are." And I'm like, "Gee, yeah, that was hard." And somebody else was like, "Oh, I'm in South Carolina, and I looked up the Green Party, and the first post on their blog was like, imagining a socialist future, reading the manifesto for the Communist Party." Like that was the first post on their blog. I know that they've had their more they have their right wing, like the hippie capitalists, like that's definitely there. But especially, as the U.S. left grows, so does the left wing of everything, the Greens included. I think Howie Hawkins was a decent example of that. We did a reading of the 2020 Green Party platform on the channel and compared it with PSL's. I thought they were very comparable. So, yeah, it's a bit of a different ideology, but Hawkins was explaining how, in his view, PSL, for example, which is sort of like largely seen as sort of the next smaller step down in terms of a left party, size-wise. They're not on the ballot in nearly as many places, etc. But they're also more Marxist, if you will. Although my understanding is they're kind of like, a lot of the membership is Marxist-Leninist, but the party itself is sort of crypto-trot. Like they call themselves Marxist and Leninist. Again, though, I think most of the membership is Marxist-Leninist. Not sure if that's ever going to be reflected in the party properly or not. But anyway, the hell was I talking about? Oh, yeah. Hawkins was saying it's like the Greens are trying to be more of a mass party, and PSL is a bit more of like a vanguard party. So, it is what it is. But a lot of the people just have absolutely no idea. Or there's this idea that getting involved in things is a bad idea. There are organizations you cannot push left. The Democratic Party is one of them. That's been demonstrated over and over again. But why is that? It's because they're thoroughly an imperialist party, like controlled by actual finance capital institutions. That's obvious. It's been demonstrated a million times. The Greens are not. And I think the concept for a lot of people that you can get involved in an organization and that your membership actually influences the direction that it takes as an organization is like it's like literally unthinkable to many people who have grown up in the US, where you literally have no choice in basically anything. Just the idea of being involved in an organization where your membership actually influences what happens. People don't get that at work. People growing up may not get it in their family. Et cetera, et cetera. Like a lot of institutions are very authoritarian in the United States. The idea that you can get involved in something that it's even somewhat democratic, honestly, is pretty healing, first of all. But it's like a foreign concept for people who've never experienced that. So, yes, get out there, see what you find. See what you find. But I'll tell you that asking me, I'm not personally acquainted with every state chapter of every organization. I can't tell you. You got to tell me. You got to tell other people. So, yeah. When I say it's a middle ground, I'm saying like on average. It's definitely left of the Democratic Party, though. So, again, if you don't even take those sort of baby steps towards building up the left, how do you expect change to ever happen? I really don't get it. People are also saying about that, they're like, I was saying the Democratic Party is why we're here. The bare minimum people can do is build up the Greens. And a lot of people won't even do that. They cannot be bothered to do it. I'm just saying, logically, that would be your next step, right? And people aren't taking it. And then people are like, oh, yeah, voting got us into this situation. Voting will get us out. I was like, Jesus Christ, you don't fucking understand anything, do you? Like, But this is, again, like people not understanding the difference between a party that takes the corporate money and one that doesn't. I'm not saying that there aren't limits to what's possible there, but you're not even exploiting what is possible there. You're just sitting around. So anyway, it makes me crazy. But the other thing is that, so here's the thing with the Bernie thing that I didn't really underscore directly in the longer piece that I read out, which is that the Democratic Party, because it is owned by capital the way that it is, like thoroughly and completely owned by capital, it can never serve as a working class organizing hub between elections. So, in other words, we know, and everyone listen real well, we know that class struggle takes many forms. Like I said, if they're gettable seats at your local city council or, whatever it is, get them. But first of all, it's only going to get you so far, even where you can get them. But get them, keeps Democrats out of them. That's fine. But then between the, whatever electoral activity, which actually is a small amount of what's going on, that organization serves as a strategy hub for all kinds of other things in ways that the Democratic Party is never going to serve as a strategy hub for. The elections are one small part of it. It takes people's involvement. I don't know what else to say. I don't really know why I need to explain that, but it seems like I do. So anyway. So somebody posts, we as leftists have to realize that social media is mostly, present company excluded, an inherently anti-revolutionary force. The algorithm is arresting your time and attention with that which is most likely to raise your cortisol, adrenaline, and which will keep you logged on, the so-called outrage machine. This time and attention needs to be seen as wasted online online commenting and arguing. This wasted time is 100% antagonistic to revolutionary work, which won't be spent arguing with people you don't agree with, but rather working with those who want to benefit their lives. We need to see that social media outrage in our lives is a closed and addictive circuit, which need not end in any actual change. Somebody else says, communists are definitely too passive right now. I saw that some Irish comrades seized a building to house homeless people in. More things like that needs to happen. Yes, Marxist Paul was tweeting about that. The Paul Connolly House, I believe it's called. Yeah, great. And, it's just one building, but, okay, it's also a building that wasn't under communist control the other day, so there's that. Take a sip. Yeah. So, another comment about Bernie. The gross hypocrisy of the Bernie movement is that he claimed it was our revolution and nothing would change in this country unless we built an organizing force which could force change, but when we needed that radical organization the most, when there were mass protests and COVID was taking people out of work and home, when he said go home and vote, I have numbers and emails from the Bernie days, but nothing was built from it. From those huge lists of emails and numbers. No, something was built from it. The thing that it was built from it is the Democratic Party. That was a crime against the movement, okay? So you're right. Yeah, it was, our revolution, whatever Bernie was calling it. But no, he fed it to capital. What I was saying is, if he had in 2016 said, okay, well, we're out here now. You all know my name. I'm filling stadiums. Now we're going to go join the Green Party en masse, all 20 million of us. And we're not running anybody for president this time, but we'll see you in the midterms. And then in 2020, we will see what we can do. Didn't do that at all. Gave everybody over to capital, and that was that. And what have they accomplished? They haven't built anything but the Democratic Party. So, yeah. Somebody says, less was Stalin bad or not debates and more action. Abso-fucking-lutely. This is what I've been saying from like day one on here. Yeah, basically that. All right. Let's see. Kudos to Howie Hawkins for offering to give up his seat to Bernie. Big fumble. The whole thing was just... But, see, that was, I think, a smart move on the Greens' part. Being like, hey, Bernie, if you're serious, please, we're inviting you in. He's like, no. Okay, well, that was bullshit. And it's not that what Bernie was... Like, it's not that the platform was bullshit. I mean, he could have done a lot more in terms of confronting imperialism. That, of course, is the limitations of... Bernie was more from the right wing of the overall, what you could call the broader left in the United States. But as far as like what he was calling for, it was broadly supported. Those are like popular reforms that people want to see changed. Absolutely. The Greens were calling for all of them and more. And, but Bernie has his deal with the Democratic Party, whatever the fuck it is. It's definitely not in the interest of working people to support that, though. That party will do nothing but stab you in the back, or occasionally it'll stab you in the front. So, yeah. And somebody says, yeah, well, we do need people like S4A saying this stuff. If Bernie had, say, joined the Greens. And again, this isn't about the Green. I mentioned them because they exist. They're the largest sort of mass left party. Bernie also could have started a Labor Party and invited everyone to join, or formed a coalition, or whatever it is. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. If the Greens wanted to keep their organizational sovereignty, and entered a coalition, whatever. But we have all these forces of the U.S. left that absolutely have to get activated and joined in sustained action against, in the political sphere, both Democrats and Republicans, and all the sort of cultural shit that both of those parties are about. I just mentioned the Green. I didn't invent the Green Party. They happen to be there, though, and they're the largest sort of force for these kinds of basic issues. It's a logical starting point. But yeah, if Bernie had done that, I absolutely wouldn't need to be saying it. It's in fact quite stressful running a small channel and feeling like you're taking on the weight of the world. When there's a mass movement going, then you're just in a support capacity, not in a you as some random individual trying to whip people into action. That's why, again, dropping the ball on this, you got a guy who can fill stadiums, not sending those stadiums of people into an independent working class institution, but into a thoroughly capital controlled one. That's where it doomed. People had to make a choice then. Am I going to go into this place that is a complete dead end, a graveyard of social movements that has been known as such for a long time? Or am I going to stay outside where, real things are possible, but we don't have as many numbers? And that's pretty much the point the left, I would say that the Bernie moment was the best time in 50 years. That moment was the best time in 50 years, the most opportune moment in 50 years to finally have the U.S. left make that break from the Dems and get organized independently. And again, there was existing infrastructure, the Green Party, to do that. When is that going to happen? Because I do not think we're going to skip over all that mid-level organizing to just, there's no need to do any of that. We'll just have a revolution. Literally, you and what army? Because, hashtag general strike gets you fucking nothing but maybe some clicks and likes. It does not get you a general strike out in the real world. So, you and what army? That army has to be put together. Anyway. Yeah, somebody says if you run as a Dem, you have to endorse whoever wins the primary. Fuck them. Do you think that would have hurt Bernie's clout? I remember that whole shit. People tried to make whatever excuse, for that to happen. Oh God, you remember the delusion when people were Bernie didn't concede, not fully, and it was just give it up, okay? He rolled over. Man, that stuff. That stuff, I was just no, what is happening here? Terrible, terrible moment for the U.S. left. And because we're back here again. We're in a pandemic. We're over a year into Biden, which gives me serious Bush-Cheney vibes. We're in a worse place now than we were in 2016 by far. We're in a much worse place. And this, honestly, some of this was avoidable. It really was, and it came down to a lot of, what Bernie being in that unique position to influence that many people. A lot of people would have done whatever he said. And that was a great time to, move this over and build it up into something that could actually outlive Bernie the individual. Uh, I don't know. It's just you only get so many historical moments to do these things. And that was one, and boy, did he piss that away. But anyway, yeah, this thing about, he had to endorse Hillary. Um, I'm pretty sure that if he had just been like, no, fuck you, your party is like whatever, uh, that only would have helped with at least most people. So, yeah. Somebody says, I wonder what happened with Bernie. Was he someone who truly believed in anti-capitalism and lost his way, got strong-armed by the establishment? Was he always just a social democrat who would never dare stray from liberalism with a kinder face? Was he someone who just wasn't confident enough to take on the establishment? Why didn't he break with the Dems once he'd built a robust movement, which he clearly did have? I mean, there were tons of people behind Bernie who wanted nothing to do with the Democratic Party that were literally supporting Bernie because he was bringing a wrecking ball into their party. That was it. When it was clear the Dems were out to undermine him at every step. Yeah, I really don't know. Who knows? I mean, at some point, this is no longer about him. He had some deal with them. Who really knows? I think it goes beyond. He got strong-armed because there were many opportunities for him to do things differently. I mean, I think that this is only worth revisiting that we never repeat these mistakes. I don't really think Bernie has anything to offer anymore at this point. And really, after 2016, it was pretty much, clear which way he was going to go. He tried it again in 2020, but, just as kind of more part of the party at that point. I mean, that said, there was a lot of messaging that gave people some actual hope. And I don't mean hope in the Obama way. I mean, like, people are actually like, oh, we can bring stadiums full of people who want this kind of change to happen, etc. I don't know. But I mean, the people are out there. People have this kind of, in the U.S., people have this thing where it's like, oh, either the Dems or nothing. And I think there is a third option in people's minds, but it takes like an enormous amount of energy for them to like surmount this whole Dems or nothing thinking. That's when I say I think that the Bernie moment was the best time in 50, the best chance, the best historical moment in 50 years for the left to break away. He brought so many people out. Like, I think we finally reached that point of energy where you could finally overcome the Dems or nothing thinking that a lot of people have. You in the United States, you will literally have tens of millions of people who will say in unison, oh, I would support a left third party, but no one else will. And they will all say it in a big group. It's scary, honestly. But that is the just sort of defective thinking that people have fallen into. And again, for people who are trying to skew this into, I'm talking about electoralism, it's not just about the elections. It's about building a mass hub for organizing people out of which many other non-electoral projects will spring. So, yeah. All right. What do we have? So somebody says, I think this is an interesting point. Anarchists do hella community work. A lot of anarchists are primarily anarchist because there isn't a theory jargon barrier to doing direct action. You see it when you volunteer at food banks, needle exchanges, etc. Yeah, that is true. It's very easy to be an anarchist. Just be like, fuck the state. Boom, you just passed your theory final. That's what it takes to become an anarchist. I mean, in seriousness, you can read other books, but that's kind of about it in the end. It's just like break down, smash the state. That's it. That's like the beginning and end of anarchism, theory-wise. And yeah, doing direct action and things like that. These are the sort of, logical consequences flowing out from that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's also, like, don't discount the decades of Cold War, anti-communist propaganda. We did Black Shirts and Reds on the channel. This goes, I think, a long way towards explaining why the U.S. left is so anti-communist. And, anarchism, I think anarchism is about as close to communism as you can get. without being a communist. Unfortunately, I think it also has like severe shortcomings as an ideology. So, you know, but yeah, you're right. Like at the end of the day, there's a lot of anarchists involved in direct action, which is great. I don't know that it's gonna, add up to much beyond that. I do not have great faith in anarchism because then, I mean, you get into all the sort of like U.S. State Department talking points and stuff like that that seem so common in the anarchist world. It is what it is. We need a lot more people in the U.S. left. It's disengaged from the masses completely. I think a lot of this is just symptomatic of that. So yeah, let's see. So somebody says Green Party has the weird hippies that I would call right wing. Yeah, again, remember everything has a left wing and a right wing, and what that left wing and right wing are not the same in every organization. Like the Republican Party has a left wing and a right wing, just that their left wing is like not what we would consider left. It's just left relative to their midpoint. So the Green Party has a right wing also, and yeah, it's like hippie capitalists and other stuff. Just kind of contrary. You get more of the like contrarian populist libertarians or like left libertarians in the right wing of the Green Party, and yeah, you need to fight that stuff absolutely. Not just like condone. No, not at all. That's not a good thing. Okay, the Libertarian Party in a number of different states tries to attach itself to the Green Party and be like, we're all the same. We're against the duopoly. No, that's not true at all. So somebody says, without green ecological values and gender equalities, communism will not work. I will second that. Yeah, you know what? Actually, that reminds me. There was a post from. Let me take a sip here. There was a post from Maupin, actually, talking about just. It had to do with abortion, but it came down to just like economic growth is good. Okay. And we're talking about the context of the U.S. So here's the thing. The U.S. does not need more economic growth. If the entire world consumed at the rate of the United States consumption, the planet would last about 3 weeks. Economic growth, when we're talking about bringing people up out of destitution, that's one thing. Giving people electricity and, mass transportation and schooling, absolutely. Building up industry in different places, yes. But we have now seen, it's 2022, that, if you can't handle all of the waste that your system is producing, that is absolutely going to be a problem. Hang on 1 minute, I got to take a break. All right, I'm back. So, waste, eco-socialism, this is a thing that we need to discuss. Marx even talked about it somewhat, although in a volume of Capital, a lot of people have not read Volume 3, including myself. I've not read all of Volume 3. But it goes back to Marx. It's just not necessarily discussed extensively. Remember, industry in Marx's day was considerably, at a lower stage of advancement. I think it was probably hard to foresee the far reach of technology development and waste that would be produced by the system. We are literally drowning in garbage. So anyway, yes, eco-socialism for sure. Somebody says the U.S. has one party, two marketing strategies, and the one ring of the media to rule their world. Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's see what else. So somebody else adds on the subject of social media. They wanted to say one more thing about the trap that is social media. Can it allow this culture of loving fame and superficial spectacle to mingle with our concept of revolutionary action? Fidel said, I hate vanity for a reason. This bourgeois thinking will ruin us. If your concept of revolution is some kind of media performance, you're playing yourself. Don't get played. Yeah. If anybody remembers the early internet, like the name for this was basically vanity sites. People who just set up websites about like, this is me, these are my pets, these are my hobbies. Thanks for visiting my site. Site counter. Join my web ring. Uh, yeah, I mean, social media took basically vanity sites and made it, really accessible. There is definitely a kind of like egoism in that. And a lot of people don't go out really looking to learn. They look for things that will just coddle their ego and reinforce their existing thinking. That's really, enter Donald Trump or whatever, there's a lot of people just looking to have their existing worldview affirmed. A lot of that going on social media for sure. All right. So in California, Peace and Freedom Party, who PSL runs with here, and the Green Party are endorsing select candidates from each other's parties. That's good. I know that PSL historically has not always gotten along necessarily with the Green Party in terms of cooperating on endorsements and things like that. I think we need a coalition, so some form of that I think does make sense. Cooperation. I don't think either. I think that, let's put it this way: both parties have only to gain from cooperation at this point. So, what else? So somebody says rejecting DNC candidates would be a start. No, you really just can't touch anything in the Democratic Party. Even the illusion that you can progressivize the Democratic Party, it's completely false. The party is owned by capital. End of story. Like, the biggest kinds of imperial finance capital own the Democratic Party. You just can't do anything with that. So somebody asked about CPUSA. Somebody responded, I'm a very new member of CPUSA, and what I can gather is the whole Democrat shilling thing is pretty much just leadership. The rank and file seems to be much firmer in Marxism-Leninism. Can't speak to PSL, though. And then they say at least the club that they're in. Let me just say that, I do not want to downplay whatever potential may be in CPUSA. I know, however, that they have had a lot of problems for a long time with right opportunism. And people say, but you were just talking about the Green Party. Yeah, but the Green Party is also not a vanguard. They're not the Communist Party of the United States. Like, we are the party, everyone else is fake, and we are it. Like, we are the line for building communism in the United States. Okay, well, you've set yourself up that way. And then, I've said it before. I mean, I saw CPUSA live streams around the 2020 election, before it. They were indistinguishable to me from a Democratic Party, like a, local, like a county Democratic Party committee holding a live stream. That's literally what it sounded like to me. I mean, thoroughly indistinguishable. That is not hyperbole. Okay, I think I made that clear. I've had other people tell me other things, like Joe Sims. Joe Sims is clearly one of the prime culprits of all of this. And I've had people tell me both ways that it is, on the one hand, Joe Sims, CPUSA has a process for vetting their leadership. Sims has been in the organization for a long time. He climbed up to the top because he really embodies what the party is all about, blah, blah, blah. If you don't like Sims, then you would hate the organization because he represents our party well. And, many dozens of people have, co-developed the Sims that basically. The things that he says, and just even him personally, like, he was their choice, the collective choice of dozens, maybe hundreds of people in the organization, and that's why he's there. So if you don't like him, then you wouldn't like basically that, yes, he is not just a good, but the perfect reflection of the organization. Then you have other people saying, no, the rank and file is like way to the left and they don't go for that kind of stuff. I don't doubt that, like, a lot of people who joined, like, maybe in the last year, who again are not part of that process of, Joe Sims, for example, not just to single him out, but he's one that is prominent. That decades-long climb to the top, like, obviously people who joined in the last year or two were not part of that process. So, yeah, definitely, I can see the potential for that because you weren't there during the time that, apparently all that decision making was occurring. But that said, this seems to be the kind of problem that that party has had for a long time, and all I'm saying is show me. If there's potential, if there is potential for the organization, just show me. That's really the easiest thing. And I'm not at this point really going out of my way to like bash on it because I would like people to just show me. You know what I mean? And that's kind of true of anybody out there. Like, look, you've made the choice. You're declaring yourself socialist, communist, Marxist, whatever. Obviously, we have to be aware of and point out longstanding historical trends. If people really feel like this mass influx of people into CPUSA is going to get the job done, I will give you some time to like show that to the world. All right, but I also can't deny that there's sort of been a longstanding issue with the right opportunism and specifically the Democratic Party for reasons that probably many of us could, elaborate on throughout their history. So anyway, what else do we have? There's a little bit more discussion about that. I'll just leave in the comment section. Let's see what else we got. So Winston Smith 666 says, "Fighting for reform only reforms you into Sisyphus. When you get the rock up the hill, you end up pushing it back up and up again, back up again and again." So Sisyphus, for those who don't know, is the myth of a man who was condemned to just roll a big heavy rock up a hill and over again, and then it would just roll back down. Revolution is the only way that works, blah, 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 absolutely, blah, blah, blah. Never lose sight and become Sisyphus. Yeah, literally no one in this conversation said to lose sight of revolution. But again, the idea is reform is a method of you fight for everything that you can get on the capitalism side of the revolution. When it becomes clear you can't take it any further, then you say that to the masses, say, we have taken this reform as far as this system can bear. If you want more change, we need to revolt. Because people don't do revolution. Like, it's such infantile, like, insane thinking to me that, like, oh, we just call for revolution and then people will do revolution. No, actually, most people are, like, very peaceful and want to avoid revolution by, like, anything. People tell themselves enormous lies to, like, avoid a revolution. People will not do a revolution unless the country is already war-torn, for example. That's a very common one. Like, people do revolutions only in, like, pretty dire, extreme circumstances. So the idea is you organize for every reform you can possibly get. You max out all of the liberties and rights that you can get in bourgeois democracy. And then when you've reached the absolute limit of everything that you can get, you say to everyone who is organized in that fight, you say, look, we've all struggled really well. We've won all these reforms. The system cannot give us any more reforms, and they're threatening to roll them back. We need to push beyond. If you want to, A, keep these reforms that you've won and make them permanent, and B, go even further, then we need to go beyond capitalism. And believe me, even in that case, a lot of people will not go along with the revolution. But this idea, you're just like, oh, revolution makes more sense, so we'll just snap our fingers and have a fucking revolution. Well, gee, why did no one think of that? Thank you so fucking much for pointing that out. It's just not the way it works. That's not how people think. It's not how people act. So this is, I don't even know if calling it idealist is good, but that is just not the way that things happen. So denying all these intermediate steps is just, you're trying to avoid becoming Sisyphus by not touching the rock, but that gets you nowhere. So anyway, this is exactly what I was speaking against this entire time. All right. What else do we have? Do you think we're on the verge of a societal collapse? Sometimes it feels that way to me. If so, do you believe we can turn that into a revolutionary moment? So, Yeah, I think that that's a real possibility. I think we're already seeing stuff like, you know, people yelling at Girl Scouts on their doorsteps for like political reasons. I think that we're in a state of extraordinary. Actually, there's a word for it: protracted civil conflict. We're not in a civil war in the United States, but there was some historian talking about the United States is in a state of protracted civil conflict, and lifespan is going down, living standards are going down, wealth inequality is going up, et cetera, et cetera. I think that we are in a social decline, absolutely. Whether or not that's going to hit some catastrophe point, I mean, there will be another recession again. That we know is just part of capitalism. What happens when that recession hits is another story. So the managers of the U.S. economy and of the dollar have been using extraordinary measures to try to stave off collapse, like the use of reserves. That is like a new thing. I mean, there were always reserves, but using the whatever, like 4 trillion that they're using, that is a new thing that was not done prior to 2008 and not even remotely close to that quantity. So they're doing a lot of new things to try to avoid another 2008 global financial meltdown. Will they succeed? I mean, they've succeeded so far, but for how long and what happens on the other side of that? Um, so yeah, it feels that way to me too. It definitely feels like people have fewer close friends. Um, just people act differently than they did even 5 or 10 years ago. I think people are more afraid, distrustful, etc. I mean, just looking at things on kind of like a micro, sociological, psychological level. I think you see it reflected in people's behavior from day to day. People, I mean, the U.S. was always kind of nuts, but like this is getting weird. Um, do I believe we can turn it into a revolutionary moment? I mean, anything's possible, but again, this is why I keep saying you need mass organizations because what do you think? A bunch of 100 million frightened people hiding in their houses are going to stage a revolution? No. You need like some social fabric and bonds, and so that's why I'm encouraging, instructing even people to get out there in your community, whatever it is, whether it's a bowling league, just economic opportunity organizations, like literally fucking anything. Get out there, see just where people come together, meet people, network, and don't wear your beliefs on your sleeves if it's not like already a left-wing political thing. But just make comments here and there, like as you develop friendships and influence, like you know, see what you can do to prod things in a leftward direction. This is how do all the things that the McCarthyites accused us of doing, basically. Um, so, do I believe we can? Yes. Do I think we need more organization? I mean, more organization. It's like, you know, I wish I had more confidence that the U.S. was ever going to overcome this and get back to, more of a state that we're in. And the problem is, even then, you go back to the 40s and 50s and whatever, the amount of like sexual, gender, and racial discrepancy and segregation and all that kind of stuff. Like, you had more organization, but it wasn't like an entirely amalgamated working class. So there's like all of those things too. So, maybe this is a case of like, break apart and recombine, where, we had organizations of like different demographics in society and then a period of breakdown. Well, maybe we need to reform in a more inclusive way now, whatever it is. But I don't know. I can tell you this. I'm not going to solve everybody's problems. I'm just going to point out some broad things that I can see are clearly not working. It's really up to everybody else to like figure out the nitty gritty of what is going to work. Um, Somebody says the ideological principles of the global free market are in reality now a total idiocy. Retrograde strategic economic policy in the West is disastrous and facilitating a financial meltdown. The capitalist digs his own grave. The rise of a new global order is upon us. Suck them national strategies of the future. Maybe. I do agree that the ideological principles of the global free market are in reality a total idiocy. I think that the next massive economic shock is going to pretty much, I mean, because whenever it comes, all people like us are going to have to do is say, first was 2008, then the pandemic, then this. Haven't you had enough? I mean, the slogans write themselves. So yeah. Let's see. Somebody says the best direct action tactics in the workplace I've learned came from an anarcho-syndicalist. While I don't agree with him on much, he has helped a lot in my personal union struggle. Yeah, so the next thing, as far as the channel, I did take a break last week. I have started recording another COVID update. There's going to be probably a long two-part COVID update. The first part kind of focusing on the overall situation in politics. I'm recording that now. And there's like 10 sub-articles within that. And then another update focusing on sort of the biological damage that COVID we now know does. For example, there's a National Geographic story. Even a mild case of COVID causes brain shrinkage. That's right, brain shrinkage. It ages the brain up to like 10 years. You don't want that. So that'll be part 2 of the COVID update. I literally have been drowning in COVID information. It's nearly impossible to keep up with it all. But anyway, that will be going up, but also the IWW organizing manual and other labor-related resources. So as far as direct action tactics in the workplace, yeah, that's more micro-level stuff. If you're familiar with some of my criticisms of Richard Wolff will talk about that he sees, and I agree, 3 broad trends in the left. There's kind of the Bernsteinian reformist SOCDEM thing. There is the Marxist-Leninist, the Vanguard Party and the state and all that kind of stuff. And then there are things that focus on cooperatives and are mistrustful of the state. He doesn't call them anarchism, but that is clearly what he's talking about. And he says that he is in the third group. And that's why he does, co-ops and all that stuff, because he's an anarchist, basically. So things anarchists are good at is if you want to learn how to set up, a food distribution table, or you want to do a DIY small workplace union effort, anarchists are really good at that. That's like their bread and butter. So yeah, you may not agree about politics or broader political strategy, but one thing anarcho-syndicalists do know is how to organize a workplace. So yeah, I would agree on that. And again, remember, like, we all are part of the broader left. Keep an open mind, It's like SOCDEMs are good for some more of the, like, media critiques and whatever. They get too caught up in it, but they're probably going to be more on top of some of what's going on in the capitalist media than are we. I think that Marxist-Leninists have a lot of theoretical and historical contributions in terms of actual revolution and data about revolutionary societies, successes and failures. Anarchists do tend to be really good at the direct action kind of stuff. So, there are strengths and weaknesses to all parts. I think we have to keep somewhat of an open mind and work together and use what works at different stages of this entire process. So it is what it is. Let's see what else we have. So here's a comment. This may end up being controversial depending on where the comment ends up, but no hate and all sympathies to people struggling with mental health problems, but many on the left couldn't organize 10 people to go play a game of basketball. We need to build organizations around health, get people outside, off their devices, talking to people, getting sunshine and moving their bodies. People are really sick nowadays. Like, can people do sustained marches in the U.S.? I'm seriously asking. I think people were seriously hurting after putting 6 hours on the streets during BLM protests. So, I mean, that is, I think that there are some valid points in there. I mean, yeah, not everybody is going to do every type of activism. Like, there's some people who can't walk as well as others. Some people have injuries, like whatever kind of conditions people have. That's not their fault. Um, I think more what I was just talking about, the sort of societal breakdown. I do think people have forgotten how to talk to other people. There's an enormous amount of fear and mistrust going around. I do think we need to sort of, get over that, invite people to things. Organizing events, people like being invited to stuff. It's social approval. Um, Honestly, just remembering things like that, I think, is key. Um, anyway, the rest of that comment, I don't think it applies to everybody, so I'll just sort of leave that. But wouldn't you rather do something in real life rather than play video games? I think video games are pure escapism at best and war propaganda at worst. Yeah, and escapism is, has its, can free up the brain to think about other things sometimes, and of course, fiction can help us to reflect on our own situations in a safe context. But yeah, there's a ton of just like, military propaganda in video games for sure. And, you need to balance it with other activities. I mean, really. People, I do think, get addicted to devices in a way, whether it's a video game console or whatever, in a way that you just did not see to the same extent like a couple decades ago, even when there were things out there. Like, yes, you need to go outside. The problem is now you go outside, the device comes with you. That just like wasn't the case as much in the past. Um, People need balance. I don't know what else to say. But the fact that there isn't a lot else to do is also like a structural reason why people are making that choice. So I don't know. But we do need events to invite people to. That's absolutely right. Remind people of like why it's worth your while to take the risk of talking to people. So a couple of people checking in, saying hello. Long time listener, first time live stream. Welcome. Um, so what else do we have? And yeah, we have to take into account like people, you know, like considering childcare needs, whatever. I think that again, for people who are more experienced with organizing real world events, like there are solutions to all these problems. Again, that's why I point people. I don't want to, with all the sectarianism and also just problems of certain groups, I don't want to endorse any specific small groups. You know what they are. They're out there. You can join them if you feel like it. I'm just not endorsing anything right now. I don't feel like handling the blowback of that, nor do I really want it on my conscience at this point. But yeah, some of the more mass organizations, like a DSA, like a Green, if you want to just like know how to meet people and hold basic events, you absolutely can learn that there. So, yeah. Let's see. Have I looked into Callan at all? I don't think so. I don't remember actually having that suggestion. Oh, Colin. Oh, is that an app? Somebody. I love that app. No, I have never heard of that. Oh, Colin. Okay. Noted. What else do we have? I got to kind of wrap up in a couple of minutes, so I'm just sort of going through for a closing note here. Where I live, there are at least 100 houses with Confederate flags within 5 miles of my house. It's very disappointing. Yeah, I mean, that might not be a great place to do door-to-door stuff, you know. That would be a better place to sort of, find somewhere safe as far as an organization and, meet people gradually from there. So, let's see. So here in Chicago, on the opposite end of the spectrum, apathy has set in. I've heard, who cares, abortion rights won't affect us here in Illinois. I don't think that that's apathy. I think it's, I think that's a form of posturing to compensate for political impotence. People are really shut out of the political process, so things that happen seem very alien because they are. They're not coming from us. They're being done to us. So I think that taking an attitude like that is like, who cares? Uh, yeah, I mean, it doesn't affect you in Illinois until it does, until there is a big right wing push to get even more, money into the elections and everything else. And then, oops, suddenly there is a, 1 month abortion ban or whatever. So, and I know that, I mean, you got to think people know that on some level. Um, that, it could really happen anywhere at some point. I mean, in one of the articles I was reading, there have been in many states. This was in the abortion rights video that I put up 2 weeks ago. Go check that out. It's like the third to last video on the channel. Um, that there has been restrictive legislation advanced in many different states, and believe me, they're just going to keep trying to push it. And then if there's a national ban, guess what? It will affect you. But I don't know if it's apathy so much as like just trying not to think about it because it's just too painful to realize that even if it did happen there, you wouldn't have any control over it anyway. I think people are just kind of going into denial. So I guess to just differentiate denial versus apathy. I mean, you're not wrong. I guess call it more denial than apathy as a just sort of coping mechanism because people don't have political power, and we know it. Um, let's see. So I'll leave this maybe as a closing note. Something that I personally want to look into more is how worker states like the Petrograd Soviet or communes in the USSR, PRC functioned in practice, and how people would recreate them maybe. So I think that that's an excellent point. And if anyone listening to this has like the best resources on this, I've gone looking for stellar resources on Soviets, how they were formed and what they did on a day-to-day basis, particularly in the 1905 to 1917 period, although then, of course, afterwards. I'm aware of some more stuff about how they worked after the revolution, but yeah, I think that that would be a very good thing to be looking into for sure. Let's see. Oh, and somebody said, did I cover the CPI video yet? All right. Well, no, I haven't. So here's a note to end on, and here's how definitely not to do it as far as when we're talking about how did the Soviets get started. There was a post I put up, is just a couple of posts ago on the YouTube community tab. Interesting video that's been going around about some of the shit happening inside Caleb Maupin's CPI cult, allegedly. Why, for example, is Maupin's right-hand person allegedly obsessed with Jim Jones, among many other disturbing points in here. This was a video called The Truth About Keaton Mansfield, put up by the Yankee Tanky, small channel. The thing is, like, he details, like, a bunch of horrific stuff that Maupin's right-hand man is allegedly doing, but he still supports Maupin and CPI. Like, maybe take a step back and understand why he is his right-hand man. Just a thought. And I, added, please, people just getting into real-world left activities for the first time, understand this kind of shit is a cancer, and you should stay far, far away from anything like it. I've been involved with various left organizations. If you ever see anything like that and it's not being dealt with, you are absolutely in the wrong place. So, I mean, I'm not going to play the video. It's 45 minutes long. But just to cover that, somebody says that Keaton dude is a far-right nut. Yeah, that's, I think, what a lot of people find in that Pat Sock, sort of scene. So, like I said, I would stay far, far away from it. Anyway, somebody says, I still don't know who Caleb Mopping is. Good. I mean, if you don't know, don't worry about it. If you do know, push back on it. But yeah, you're not really missing anything constructive. Literally, okay, here's my closing note. Because I was talking about this I was messaging with somebody about this. And they're like, oh, you give it too much attention. And I'm like, no, no, no. When I set up this channel in February 2020, guess who my first viewers and commenters were? Some of them were people I brought over from the Facebook page I was running, and when that was still going. And that helped me get to 1,000 subs, so that was really good. And then I got kicked off of Facebook. But some of the other people were people who were already in this sort of sphere of, like, you know, the sort of right, what we now call pat socks, what people are calling Nazballs, etc. A lot of it was people coming over from, like, a Caleb Maupin audience. Infracell, I don't think, existed at that time. But they were coming in and just expecting and sort of demanding that, you know, I would be like that. I'm like, I don't know who the fuck you're talking about, but what you're saying is wrong. And so I eventually had to look into it of, like, what are we talking about? What is this? I mean, and again, people would just call it, like, Nazballs then. Now there's, like, the Pat Sock thing, kind of like that. Potsies. I don't think has the ring to it some people would like. It works better as a visual thing, P-A-Z-I. Anyway, but people were flooding my channel, like, oh, why are you doing this and that? I'm like, I don't know, because I don't think that, because I'm a Marxist, and why are you calling yourself a Marxist and thinking whatever fucking reactionary shit you just said? And so I had to ban lots of these people, and it was getting crazy, and I'm like, where the fuck are all these people coming from? This was the last thing I expected when I set up, like, a Marxist channel, was to be getting hit with all this, like, right-wing nonsense. And then, you know, I went to the source of it. And, you know, my attacks on a Maupin or an Infracell or whatever is part of an effort to turn off the tap on that garbage, because they're influencing people who might not be influenced into that kind of disruptive behavior otherwise. You know, yes, I don't want to give it any more attention than it deserves. But I do think that we need, you know, if the tap can be shut off more or less permanently, I think that that needs to happen, because I'm telling you, it had a massively disruptive influence on my channel, made just moderating things that much more difficult. I think we've finally gotten to a point where it's a lot better now, but it was kind of 2 years of difficult struggle that took different phases. First, it was like, you can't be a feminist and a Marxist. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, you know, women's rights are working class rights. Half of the working class is women. What are you talking about? But it was just like one thing after another like that. And, you know, that was time that would have been better spent just focusing on, I don't know, socialism. So, you know, that was one of the fights. Then there's the whole land back and nationalism, and then it's like Russia and war. And, you know, you have people, I mean, there's this whole thing about Victory Day recently, and, you know, people are trying to accuse Russia of, you know, co-opting the Victory Day thing when multiple countries contributed to the, you know, the end of World War II. And people rightly point out, well, the USSR actually made the biggest sacrifices, you know, lost the most people in World War II. And I pointed out, yes, but actually the neo-czarist counter-revolutionary government of Russia is co-opting the USSR's revolutionary anti-fascist history. And, you know, anyway, just all that sort of Russian nationalist stuff going on as well. That's another facet of it. Now we've got the abortion rights thing going. I mean, it's like a laundry list of right-wing issues: anti-feminism, anti-indigenous, anti-abortion, nationalistic, like, you name it. Anyway, turning off the tap, I think that's, you know, I do think that the days of that stuff is numbered. It's just going to wind up merging back into the right wing where it came from. And I think that the left properly will get big enough that we can just sort of flick it off at a moment's notice, you know, and just get out of here and it's done. You know, already I think a lot of that contrarian right populist stuff is already on the way out. But yeah, it's just, that was not a fight I was expecting to have to wage. Let's just put it that way, you know. And then of course on the other side you have the Vosches and all this sort of Democratic Party, new face of the Democratic Party, radlib, like pseudo-anarchist. I mean, believe me, most of the anarchists I've met, if they ran into a Vosh, they would not really. I feel like this guy is not an anarchist. But anyway, goofy, crazy stuff. Unfortunately, we're starting from a point where there aren't a lot of mass organizations. People growing up were raised by baby boomers or Gen X. That wasn't the most radical generations. And people are growing up not necessarily, unless they were real steeped in some particular resistance tradition or another. They probably didn't grow up with any sort of language for understanding what's happening, and so they get fooled by a Vosh, or if they're on the conservative side, they get fooled by a Maupin or somebody like that. And eventually, we will build back up the baseline education of the U.S. left that all of these misconceptions and deceptions just don't hold water anymore. And I guess let us raise our glasses towards that point. And this was a good stream, but I'm going to sign out here. Thanks to everybody for dropping in, contributing to the conversation. We had a good round of comments without any trolls, actually, for once. So that was nice. Usually there's one or two. I didn't see any today. So that was nice. Thanks to current patrons whose names are on the screen. Like I said, some labor-themed videos are coming this month. I really just got knocked back a bit by this whole Roe v. Wade thing. Just trying to process, my God, people want to be socialists or communists, but then aren't involved in organizing activity. And then, this is the outcome. People are, humping the leg of the Democratic Party. Guess what? They're literally standing in the way. And now look at what's happening. Roe v. Wade, on its way to being overturned. Again, to his credit, Bernie Sanders calling for the filibuster to be removed so they can codify Roe into law. That way the Supreme Court can't do what it's going to do with it. And Biden's dragging his feet. I'll do another video on that because I have a bunch of articles that I collected for this live stream and I didn't get them. We had a different discussion today instead. But I'll do a video on that this week as well. So that's some of the stuff that's coming up. Labor-themed stuff. Follow up on the Roe v. Wade. And COVID updates, some long ones. We'll see what happens. All right. Thanks again for dropping by, and we will catch you in the next video.